Welcome to MOOC Introduction to Sociology Part 2. Today's topic of discussion will be liberal and radical feminism. So, when we are talking about feminism, we first have to know about the feminist movements in the West. So, since we are talking about radical and liberal feminism, so we will be talking about the movements in the West only. So, according to feminist movements in the West, there were three waves: first wave, second wave, and third wave. The first wave was from 1890 to 1960. The second wave from 1960 to 1990, and third and fourth wave that consecutively took place are continuing till date. Okay. So these movements had made prominent scope in terms of proposals and developments for women. For example, it had some introduction of acts, policies, legal systems, and that were made specifically for women or those who identified as women devoid of men supremacy. Now, if we talk about classification of women as a thought, we have to talk about the types of feminism that were identified by Alison Jagger in 1983. Jagger proposed 4 different types of feminist thoughts, which are liberal feminism, socialist feminism, Marxist feminism, and radical feminism. Now, after radical feminism, there are again, numerous thoughts or numerous thinkers have kept on adding to the different thought processes of feminist movements, and they are black feminism, ecofeminism, cultural feminism. These are the noteworthy ones. Now, today we are talking about liberal feminism. So, let's move on to the key characteristics of liberal feminism. Now, firstly, it aimed on individualistic equality through political and legal reform. Individualistic equality. So it paid importance to the individuals, not to the collective, but individual women for political and legal equality through political and legal reform. Next, it did not make any alteration in the patriarchal societal structure. Let's omit the word patriarchal for the time being and say the prevalent societal structure for the time being. Now, the wants of women were majorly focused on law and policies or reforms of laws and policies, and they demanded that such laws and policies need to be free of male influences. So these were the characteristics that made liberal feminism, it's the key characteristics of liberal feminism that made it prominent. Now, next we move on to the nature of liberal feminism. Liberal feminism, it demanded equality. We just said that it demanded individualistic equality through political and legal reform. So, it aims or the nature is the demand of equality. Just as we said earlier that there was no alteration of patriarchal societal structure, therefore, it was majorly reformatory by nature. So it was majorly reformatory by nature. It made the reformations inside the society. It did not challenge the societal structure, but it said that, okay, let the men remain in the society and let's make reforms within that societal structure that is prevalent or that is proposed by the patriarchy. It had major legal leanings. So, majorly what it focused on was legal or act-based reformations. And Gila Elitine, she said that liberal feminism could not identify the conflicts that lies within the society. That is, it fails to identify the nature of the society and remained reformatory. So what was the nature of the society that she is talking about, or what is the nature of the society that we are again and again talking about? We are talking about the patriarchal system of society where male are in the supreme power, or majorly all the functions of the society are dominated and regulated by the male counterpart. Now, what is the criticism of liberal feminism? It did not consider the patriarchal nature of the society. Next, it emphasized on individual equality. It ignored the collectiveness of women. Individual equality should be there, but women, when rights are not given, when we need to access the rights, women need to be thought as a collective. Movement should be made in the form of a collective rather than individual movement. So liberal feminism failed to take women as a collective. Remember, in that time period, collectiveness was very needed because at that time it was just the beginning of feminist movements. Now, they demanded for equal rights as men, which ignored the female attributes of women, and this was rationalized by radical thinkers. So this was also what the radical thinkers criticized. Next, we'll be doing radical feminism. So we will take this point and explain it in the radical feminist part. Okay. Next, we are going on fourth criticism of the liberal feminist, which is the demands that were made by the liberal feminist was majorly from the focus of the white women, or the problems of white women were kept in the mind, whereas they did not think about the black women and they did not think about their rights or their demands, because so it divided the women and it did not think, and the rights that they demanded for were very, very dominated by individualistic needs and not women as a collective. And that too, what I said earlier, they kept the white women in mind. Okay. Now, who are the eminent thinkers of liberal feminism? John Stuart Mill, Mary Wollstonecraft, Helen Taylor, Elizabeth Stanton, they were the eminent thinkers of liberal feminism. What were the reformatory outcomes that resulted from the liberal feminist movements? Maybe there were various shortcomings of the liberal feminists. Maybe they did not, they overlooked a lot of points that needed to be challenged. But there were also some reformatory movements that happened because of the liberal feminist movements. And those are the stepping stone of feminist movements of all time. And that is the legal and policy-oriented reforms that were only possible both in public and private spheres. Through this type of movement, we can contradict now that a certain class of the society were benefited, but we surely cannot ignore that this was the stepping stone of the feminist movement, right? Now, what are the examples or the policy-oriented reforms that happened with the liberal feminist movements? Those were Equal Pay Act, Act Against Sex Discrimination, Protection Against Domestic Violence Act. All these were proposed by the liberal feminist movements, beginning from the right to vote and right to work. Okay. Next, we move on to the radical feminism. So, radical feminism, it challenged the liberal feminists in a lot of ways. And we can say that radical feminism is a strike opposition to what the liberals had to propose or had to do. Now, let us look at how did radical feminism emerge. Before the emergence of radical feminism, what was prominent was thoughts of liberal and socialist feminism. This type of thinking emerged in 1960 and in the consecutive years, especially as a derangement from the previous two lines of thought. And why was it so? It challenged the popular beliefs that liberal and socialist feminism had in patriarchy and the systems of patriarchy. So, while we were discussing about liberal feminism, we said that liberal feminism was of reformatory nature which did not propose any deviance from the patriarchal society, and it was meant to be that way. Now, radical feminists, they did not believe in the patriarchal system and the systems of patriarchy, and they said that let us move out from this prevalent, or let us challenge this prevalent structure of the society. Why it should be challenged? Why it needed to be challenged? And what are the proposals that were made by the radical feminists? Firstly, they wanted to abolish the notion of patriarchy because they believed that the causes of women's oppression and perils originate from social roles and institutions that are constructs of patriarchy or male supremacy. Therefore, they created a belief that role reversal was absolutely necessary in patriarchal heterosexual society for abolition of women's oppression. According to the radical feminists, society was a patriarchal construct. The roles, the institutions, the everything that we see around, or the radical feminists believed so, that everything we see around are constructs of patriarchy, and the roles that the women are assigned to are constructs of patriarchy. So they wanted to abolish this patriarchal system only. For them, if society remains or believes in this patriarchal system, there cannot be no end to women's oppression. Now, they also proposed that gender-based roles or gender, the notion of gender, should be changed. What is gender? Gender is the role that we absorb by the society's norms. The gender is a performance. Gender is something that we perform to the society. Gender and sex are different. Sex is scientific designation of one's orientation, but gender is the construct of the society. And radical feminists believe that since society is patriarchal system, therefore the gender one is assigned to is also a result of the patriarchal system. Therefore, gender roles need to be changed. I'll give you a very simple example. When a girl child is born in a family, she is given the choice of dolls and cooking toys and the color of pink or red or anything that is associated being feminine, right? And a boy child is given toys like cars, guns, and blue or green or black and white, anything that is associated to be masculine. Now, the radical feminists challenge that if gender role reversal needs to begin, it should begin from the family or within the family. After proposal comes the challenges that were made by the radical feminists towards the prevalent societal structure. Now, what are they? By this time, you must have understood that radical feminists laid a lot of importance on gender and gender roles, okay? So, they challenged the system of gender role. They believed in gender role sensitization and neutralization of gender roles. So, what does gender neutralization mean? Just now I gave you the example of girl child and boy child and the toys or the colors associated with the girl child and boy child. So they wanted to neutralize that. They wanted to begin that neutralization from the private sector, which they believed will move on to the public sector, or not the sector, the other public sphere. Okay. Now, the radical feminists therefore emphasized on equalization of sex and gender. So what I mean to say is they proposed that sex and gender should not be determinants of each other. I mean, the society should not determine one's gender roles on the basis of sex. That is what the radical feminists proposed. They also said that the idea of motherhood is forced labor inflicted upon women because it is the men who decide duties of the woman as a mother. Therefore, for them, the idea of motherhood was forced labor, and they challenged the ways the ways that is taught by the society for very long period of time. And therefore, they also said that you have to value the woman's value as a mother and as a nurturer. And it also stressed on the importance of accepting such in the women's culture. That is, besides challenging the ways of how motherhood is perceived by the society, it also challenged how motherhood should be challenged by the women culture as well. What I mean to say is, it wanted to establish motherhood in a heightened pedestal. Rather than attaching emotional values to it, it wanted to add a pedestal value to motherhood, both for the society, patriarchal society, and within the women's culture as well. Next, we are going on what the radical feminists had to propose towards the patriarchal society. Firstly, it proposed gender discrimination needs to be eliminated. There should not be any gender discrimination whatsoever within the society, so that women's oppression, it can put an end to the women's oppression. Next is gender neutralization is necessary. How gender neutralization is necessary? Again, we are going back to the example of toys, which begins from the private sphere of life, and that can result in the change of mindset of men and women alike when they move on in their lives and move on to the public sphere, and they carry forward the thought of a neutralized gendered society. Neutralized society, not a gendered, but a neutralized society. Okay, now next is gender and sex. That should be classified. You should not, they propose that gender and sex should not be equalized. Both are different things. And the roles they play cannot be associated with each other or should not be associated with each other. So they should be classified. Okay. And the fourth thing that they proposed is women should fight unitedly for the cause of putting an end to their oppression. They did not believe in individualistic movement as the liberals had. They rather wanted women to unite and fight towards the cause. Okay. Next, we are moving on to the eminent thinkers of radical feminism. Radical feminism brought in a lot of eminent thinkers. It was supported by a lot of thinkers who maybe at the beginning identified themselves as socialist reformers, but later on they could be or they can be classified as radical feminist thinkers. When we are talking about radical feminist thinkers, we just cannot miss out Simone de Beauvoir and her celebrated writing, The Second Sex. The Second Sex, she first proposed that the relation of gender and sex needs to be abolished. Sex and gender cannot be united. They are two different terms, they associate two different ideas, and they simply cannot be generalized that way. And she suggested that one is not born a woman but becomes one. And how does that becoming happen? By the gendered roles that are proposed by the patriarchal society. So if we can put an end to how patriarchal society sees women in their gendered role, then we can abolish the idea of gender associated with sex or sex associated with gender. Next, we move on to Kate Millett. Kate Millett's another great writing, Sexual Politics, where she defines the connection of power, sex, politics, where politics is used beyond the meaning of the term. It is a relation that the well-defined groups of the society, that is the male, has with the coherent groups, the races, castes, classes, and sexes. What I mean to say is, Millett here is working on the term politics. Not politics as in politics we understand. Politics is the interrelation of power, sex, and what power has to do with sex and how it influences the powerful group of the society, that is the male, with the coherent groups, that is the other races, castes, classes and sexes, where we easily can talk about the female group. Okay, so this is one book that we can talk about. In fact, these are good reads if somebody wants to learn about radical feminism. Then we can talk about Firestone's The Dialectics of Sex, the case for feminist revolution. She just does a very well balanced work saying how feminine oppression could be put an end to via the abolition of sex dichotomy. She says that the reproductive ability of women is the reason for gendered division of labor and the patriarchy's ruling ideology, which has been constructed on sexism. Therefore, for Firestone, natural birthing should be or can be replaced by artificial birthing procedure. What she tries to do is she tries to justify that the role of the reproducer or the role of being a mother should not be taken for granted by the patriarchal society, and if such is the thing, then artificial birthing procedures can be an alternative to the or should be an alternative to the natural birthing procedures, so that what she believes that oppression of women happens because of her reproductive ability. She is reduced to the reproduction machine that can be reformed. Now, we can move on to views from other radical thinkers or the thinkers of other radical wing. It holds the view that women are superior. Firstly, this. Secondly, it accepts that there are differences between male and female. There are differences in values and traits. It accepts that, and it also says that women are superior. Therefore, superiority of the women should be accepted everywhere. It partializes the female or women attribute, which means it separates the male and female attributes and it compartmentalizes so. And it also celebrates motherhood. Now, what we can see is dialectics of sex proposed, that is, Firestone proposed. These feminist thinkers, though belonging to the radical wing, also proposes just the opposite. They accepts motherhood as something very superior to female, and they want to celebrate that motherhood. In one stance, we can say that Firestone kind of said the same thing, but in a very twisted manner or in a very nuanced manner, which firstly, one can amiss, but then secondly, if given a good thought, can relate to the celebration of motherhood, because Firestone also said this, that if motherhood can be given its due respect, then only it should be celebrated, which is also proposed by the radical wing. Okay, now this is all about the radical and the liberal feminisms or the feminist thoughts. What we can conclude is liberal feminism and radical feminism are stark opposite to each other. Radical feminism, it stemmed as a counterpart of liberal feminism, because radical feminism did not accept the reformatory ways of liberal feminism. Liberal feminism proposed reformatory movements within the societal structure, whereas radical feminism proposed the abolition of the prevalent societal structure, or the prevalent patriarchal societal structure. Radical feminism proposed the celebration of women's attributes and values, whereas liberal feminism proposed that men and women are equal. So, there can be a stark contrast that is felt between the liberal and the radical feminists. That will be all for today's session. Thank you.